Hey everyone, this is Chris Newman from the SpreadsheetGuru.com, here to introduce episode number 3, where I go into some of the VBA that feeds some of the user forms I created in episode 2. If you are new to this video series and haven't watched the first 2 episodes, I highly recommend you go back and watch those. Those are going to give you a lot of context into what I'm building, what I'm creating. And without further ado, let's get into the episode. Hey everyone, we're right back at it in episode 3, going to take some of the designed user forms that we created back in episode 2 and actually put some VBA code to them to make them actually do stuff. So I'm going to hit just a bunch of different things that I've gone ahead and done. Hopefully you'll find some of the tactics I'm using creative, unique. Hopefully they give you some ideas for some of the stuff you might be working on. But I'm just gonna go through some of the atypical stuff that I've run into while creating these user forms, and also just some little tips for things that I like to do when I'm coding for the user forms. So the first thing I like to do is I like to have a little test button on my spreadsheet, and that kind of just lets me easily launch that user form quickly to test out what I've been coding. So my initial user form, if you remember, we wanted to create a list of the custom formats, and I have this list box reading in an Excel table. And I'm using this Excel table to kind of store the data for each number format rule that the user creates. And I am only reading in the first column, or the name of the rule. And I'm going to kind of use that as my lookup ID throughout this whole add-in. Now you'll notice I have some numbers tacked on there just for visual purposes, but on the back end I remove that, so it's kind of 4 characters that I remove with the write function. You've got a 2-digit number, a period, and then a space, and then that gets me my name right there without any spaces in front of it. So the first thing I tackled after creating this user form was coding for these up and down arrows. So these are just basically moving the position of the rule within the list box and ultimately the table. So you can see I can select one and I can move them down, I can move them up. So if I wanted to move the month to the top, I could do that, and then you'll see that reflected in the table once I close out the user form. So pretty cool. Definitely gave a little fist bump when I got that working, because that was the first time I had coded anything for that. So that was fun to figure out, but it wasn't too hard. And the second thing I wanted to show you guys is, since we're using images for buttons, the mouse cursor doesn't really change when you hover over it. And I always like to have some sort of indicator on clickable buttons. So the way to fix this, I'll actually get into the editor right here, is to click on one of the images, and then on the mouse pointer property, we're going to scroll all the way down to custom, and then you can actually point it to a mouse icon that you like. So I found a really good one on the internet some time ago. I have an article that has the download to this icon, this hand cursor icon, and that's the best quality one I've been able to find. So I'll put a link to that below in the video description. But if we go and run this user form again, you'll see when I hover over, I now get that kind of change in the icon for my cursor, and without having to say click this or click that, the user is automatically going to know, yeah, that's a button that I can click. So it just makes it pop out. So I'll kind of rinse and repeat for all those buttons to make them pop out a little bit more from a UI perspective. Now, I think I had mentioned in the last episode with the second user form that we created for the new rule. It's this guy over here. I wasn't sure if I was going to use one user form or if I was going to use two user forms. In my head, I kind of had the option of, hey, I could use a user form that was separate for the edits and a user form that was separate for creating a new rule, or maybe there might be a way to make it a little bit more efficient and not have to manage multiple user forms and just house everything under one. So I think I came to the conclusion just to use one, and kind of the only difference between the two is I have two buttons that kind of lay over top of each other. You can see right here I have the create and then the save edits buttons. I'll try to put that back. And I'm using some techniques that I hadn't used in the past that were a little interesting. So I'll attempt to explain those as best as I can. But what I'm using to tell the user form which state I'm in is if I go in the code for the list manager user form, I'm using something called a tag. And what a tag is, it's kind of like I like to explain it as a little lockbox. So you can kind of store one value in each control, and it's under the tag property. So you can see it down here as well. And what I'm doing is when I click either the new button or the edit button, I'm taking the list box and I'm changing the tag to either create or I'm changing it to edit. And that's going to tell me which state my next user form that's going to open needs to be in. So let's just take the new button for example. It's clicked. I send create to the tag of the list box. I hide that user form, and then I show the rule manager user form. And we'll go down a little bit, and then I determine if I'm in the create or the edit mode. So the only two things I really have to change is the caption at the top of the user form. I just say either create new number format, or if it's in the edit number format, and then I toggle the visibility on either the create or the edit buttons, those gray buttons at the bottom. So they're both not visible at default, and I toggle either one to be visible based on the state. So that was kind of a neat little way I thought to use a single user form for kind of two states and cut down on all my edits. Because like I mentioned previously in the last episode, I like to tweak a lot of my user forms at the kind of near the end of the process of creating add-ins. And if I'm moving all this stuff around and they kind of all have the same look and feel, I'm going to have to do that twice, and that's going to be a real pain in my butt. And with it all being consolidated, I can kind of move stuff around, and I don't have to worry about making those changes on a different user form. So the next thing I'll talk about is kind of this little section up here, this position. And this is going to allow the user to pick which row in the table or the list box that rule is going to be stored, and ultimately which button position in the ribbon user interface that rule is going to be available to the user. So I kind of just picked 50 as my max, so I'll have a max of 50 buttons. I'm not sure if that's too much or too little, but that's currently my max right now. And I wanted to make this little label dynamic. In my mind, it doesn't make sense to say 1 through 50 if you only have 5 buttons created. So I wanted to make it a little smarter. So what I did to address that is I also used that tag property, and I said I'm going to store the max number of rows that are currently stored in my table and tack on a 1 to that. So you can see that right here where I'm counting the rows in the table and then adding 1 to it. So what that does is if I have 5 rows in my table currently, it's going to give me a range of 1 through 6. And the reason why I put that in the tag along with the text, and you can see I'm kind of doing that range 1 through whatever down here, is I needed to also incorporate that into my input validation. So obviously I don't want users inputting negative numbers or numbers over 50 or over, in this case, 6. So I need some way to validate that. So I'm storing kind of the range up here. Also behind the scenes, I have a tag that's also storing that max number, so I can use that in my validation. So whenever someone clicks in this text box and starts typing in numbers, I have a little bit of code that gets executed right here that's going to make sure that they're entering numbers and that they're also entering a number that's within my range. So in my continued example, just 1 through 6. So that was kind of another case where I just used that tag input. Now, could I have kind of trimmed down the range and used that also? Yeah, but the tag just kind of seemed a little more simplistic to use. So I went with that solution. Another one that was kind of fun to work on was this number format text box. And this is where the user is actually going to put in the number format rule. And I wanted to make sure that they were inputting a rule that was valid, because you don't want to create buttons that won't ultimately work. So I have some indicators over here that are going to either say it's not okay or okay. And to get these icons, I used a font that I downloaded off the internet that I've been using for a couple years, called Font Awesome, and I'll show you how it kind of works. So it's literally called an icon font. So this is actually the font right here within a text box, and all I do is after I've installed their font, I go out to their website and I'll show it right here. They've got lots and lots of different icons within their font. I actually backed this on Kickstarter, so I have the paid version of it, but they do have a free version as well. And you can go up to their icons section, and they have a search bar, and they're constantly adding different icons. So I think I just searched check, and they have all these icons with checks. And if I go to show cheat sheet, I can copy the value within their font to get that to show. And then I literally just paste it inside the text box, making sure my font is Font Awesome. And then that shows. And then I can just change the color and just paste it in as an image like I showed in episode 2. So I've got this check mark and the X stacked on top of each other. And it's just going to toggle on and off the visibility between the two based on if the number format is valid or not. So if we go to the format rule input piece of code I wrote, all I'm doing is I am constantly, every time a character is entered into that text box, I'm validating whether that format works on cell A1. So it's just constantly validating based on if it passes the test or not. It's going to toggle the visibility of those two icons. So just another kind of indicator that everyone's used to when they see X's or check marks next to a text box on if it's valid or not. And then ultimately when they hit the save button down here, I'll make sure that the format's valid one last time. So something else that's a little bit different in this user form than episode 2 is I added a description section. This is something that we'll use to populate the screen tip for the buttons. So when they hover over a button, you'll see some text appear, and then users will get to kind of put some notes on what that format is used for. So added that to the user form and also my table over here to store it. And another thing I wanted to cover real quick is when you're dealing with multiple user forms, make sure they don't overlap or overlay each other when you're going to the next one. So when you have your initial user form and I click this new button to go to my next one, make sure your previous user form's hidden or unloaded. It just makes the experience more clean for the user when they don't have a lot of disabled user forms in the background. So keep that in mind when you're kind of toggling between different user forms to make sure only one appears at a time. And then finally, I had a comment in the last episode asking why I didn't like the command buttons because you can put images in them. In my response to that, so let's make one real quick, and I can show you what they were pointing out. So I make this button right here, and I go and copy this. You can actually put a picture in there, and you can change the background and stuff. The one thing you can't change though, let me get rid of this caption, is you can't get rid of this this little shadow right here. And there was no way I could find when I was kind of playing around with whether to use command buttons or image controls. There's no way to get rid of that little border right there. And that kind of turned me off of the command button altogether. Now, the command button does have a lot of great events that you can capture with the VBA. So you can see they have a lot of events here versus a button. You can see only has 6 or 7 events. But I've never really run into instances where I needed those specific events. The only one I could think of that I've used a lot is capturing the enter keystroke to execute a button. So you can't do that currently with an image. But what you can do, and what I've done in add-ins in the past, is just make a very small command button. And I'm not going to do it here, but you hide it behind your image control, and you can just send it backwards until it's hidden. And if you change the default property to say true instead of false, that will let you capture the enter keystroke. So in this form, if I want my users to be able to fill out this form and just hit the enter key instead of having to click, I'll have this set up, and then on the click event, I'll just say unload the user form. So I can show that here. I'll click new. I'll kind of click around in here, type whatever, and then I can hit my enter key, and then that exited out of that user form for me. So that's another little hint that I've used a lot when I just have one button that I want to give the enter command to. So I'll kind of stop it here. I still have a little bit more to do from the back end, but I think I've gotten kind of all the interesting stuff. Obviously, I gotta create some code to delete items, and then to save the information once the user enters it. I've still got that yet to do. And then I think I'll actually go in more depth in the next episode on how I'm going to handle dynamically including icons in the ribbons. We'll kind of talk about how we're going to get this folder button working, and then how that's going to translate into grabbing icon files from a specific location, and then how we're going to get that into the ribbon user interface. So it should be a pretty interesting episode. And as always, please give me your feedback, give me your tips if you saw anything I missed or overlooked. Subscribe to the channel to get notifications on when these next episodes are coming. And just give me your overall thoughts on how the episodes are going. Greatly appreciate it. I'll see you in the next episode.